Thank you to all the organizations that co-sponsored this event. It's definitely an honor to be here. And also it's an honor to be at the alma mater of Paul Robeson, actually. A lion of a man in many respects. So I thank you again for me to be here. But to get to the heart of the conversation, and I want to invoke the words of J. Edgar Hoover, because to discuss the most dangerous internal threat to national security, the Black Panther Party, we must begin to look at the international context to which the Black Panther Party was born. Of course, in the post-World War II period, there were two preeminent superpowers that emerged, as most of Europe laid in ruins, the Soviet Union on one side and the United States on the other. The Soviet Union, in many ways, had opened up a new paradigm for the working class and the poor internationally. The Russian Revolution of 1917 overthrew the Tsar, overthrew the capitalist class, and developed the first democratic socialist society. But this third world nation, in many respects, had to deal with isolation from the rest of the world, the failed revolutions in Europe, imperial attack by the United States was one of the countries that sent troops to Russia to overthrow the Bolshevik Revolution, and civil war inside the country. We would see the rise of conservative leadership, a conservative reformist leadership that was not about extending the worldwide revolution, and I'm talking of Joseph Stalin. This one-party rule that rested on a planned economy was, in many respects, and we point out that it was a distortion of the genuine ideas of democratic socialism and Marxism. But for many workers and youth around the world, it was an ideological and economic alternative to Western capitalism and U.S. capitalism. The post-World War II period was a time of revolution and counter-revolution. You would have the Chinese Revolution in 1949. You have Cuba in 1959. The Algerian Revolution from 1954 to 1962. Many of these revolutions was rooted on the peasantry and using the tactic of guerrilla warfare. In many ways, it was these revolutions that helped shape the consciousness of a new generation that was coming to birth. And we're thinking of the Black Panther Party. Then we have the United States on our other side, now the most preeminent capitalist nation in the world, coming out of over 10 years of the Great Depression. An economic, military, cultural, political superpower. And most of the United States working class and middle class were doing quite well. But that was because of the social struggle on the ground by working class people to fight for their rights for better wages, health care, and unions. I'm thinking of the 1930s and 40s and the great general strikes. But despite the claims of democracy and freedom, the working class and poor, and particularly the black working class and poor, were living the American nightmare. Most people think of Jim Crow as a racial, as a southern construct. But like Malcolm X said, as long as you're south of the Canadian border, you're south. And so we're talking about a Jim Crow America, a racial apartheid. Of course, the Black Freedom Movement gave birth to the Civil Rights Movement, ending southern apartheid, breaking the back of the aristocracy of the former planter class. It ushered Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act. But what is missing, and what Malcolm X, what Robert F. Williams pointed out, organizations like the Revolutionary Action Movement and SNCC, Students for a Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, had pointed out that civil rights did not do anything to break the back of police violence, poor housing, massive unemployment in the urban centers of the United States. In many ways, even Dr. King had to draw the conclusion that Black America in the urban areas were internal colonies, denied political representation, economic exploited, and cultural subjugated. And then Watts explodes in 1965. A young man is stopped at a traffic light by the police. It would explode with 34 people dead, over 1,000 wounded, 4,000 people arrested, causing over $40 million in property damage. It was one of the most explosive urban rebellions that we would have in U.S. society. The Black Panther Party would be born 1 year later, October 1966. And Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, students at Merritt College, who were already engaged in struggle on the question of black studies. And we know that they're taking away black studies around a number of campuses around this country. And so they took the image of the Panther from the Stick campaign in Loudoun County, Alabama, to form an independent black party. They rested on the question that we should have control over our community, and that the police was running rampant, killing a young man by the name of Denzel Duell. That traffic lights were not in the community to slow down speeding cars. Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton used the question of armed self-defense that Robert F. Williams advocated in 1957. And they used the California state law that allowed citizens to carry weapons in broad daylight. It will be 1 year later, in 1967, and the Mudford Bill, which struck the law, rendering the Black Panther Party armless in many respects. By the way, that bill was supported by the NRA, if we think about today's discussion around gun control. The Black Panther Party was influenced by Frantz Fanon, or Che Guevara, or Mao Zedong. But who was the architect for them? Who was the father of the Panther Party? Malcolm X, who would be assassinated 1 year before, February 21st, 1965. And in many respects, the Black Panther Party drew the conclusion that most revolutionary fighters within the United States was the street youth, the unemployed, the sisters and brothers who were doing time in the penitentiary. But a great weakness of the party is that it did not seek to make links with the wider working class and trade union movement. Because the role of workers, selling their labor on a daily basis to the bosses, having their hands on production, we know the power of what workers can do when they stop business as usual. They can slow down this economy. What was the Black Panther Party program? What did it flow from? If you look at the program of the party, it flowed from the Nation of Islam. It flowed from Malcolm X's organization, Afro-American Unity. And they actually took what we want, what we believe, from those two particular organizations. I want to give you a snapshot of what the Panthers were talking about. We want freedom. We want power to determine the destiny of our black community. We want decent housing fit for shelter of human beings. We want an end to the robbery by the white man. They later would change that to say the capitalists of our black community. We want an immediate end to police brutality and murder of black people. This program spoke to the question of self-determination within American society, American democracy. They also highlighted that the black community is being relegated to the sidelines of society. And so they established key survival programs that the state was not providing for African Americans. We can talk about the People's Free Medical Research Health Clinic, which diagnosed and deal with the question of sickle cell anemia, which predominantly affects African Americans. Interesting enough that this program was at least a year or two before the scandal broke on the Tuskegee Institute Syphilis Project. They established a free breakfast program. And if you ever went to public school back in the days, before the Panthers developed the program, public school was not feeding children breakfast. This is what the Panthers would do. They established free busing for families who had prisoners in outreach distances. The average age of a Panther was 17 to 21 years old, young people. Moving this organization forward, being radicalized by events internationally, changing their consciousness. Many of you are probably the same age as them. Over 40 chapters were formed by 1969 of the Black Panther Party. They had a very loose membership requirement. I will come back to that in a moment. But I want you to understand how significant this organization was. They made statements, groundbreaking statements on the question of gay rights. If you read Huey P. Newton's statement on the gay rights movement, it was trailblazing in 1970. On the question of gender equality, groundbreaking. They even influenced the elderly when they established the Gray Panthers. But what was the events that were really moving the organization forward? The question of the Vietnam War. France was defeated in Dien Bien Phu. The United States was getting their asses kicked by rice eaters and those carrying with tennis shoes and a rifle. You had a draft resistance the first time in U.S. society, in mass. Young people saying, I will not go to war against the people who have done nothing to me. You had a profound internationalism developing in society. The question in the 1960s was not the question of if socialism, but what kind of socialism. Young people already had it in mind that capitalism is a misery that we're living through. And so these events highlighted the Black Panther Party's critique of U.S. imperialism on one side and international white supremacy on the other. The anti-Vietnam movement made important links between the Black Panther Party and the white left. Students for a Democratic Society was the largest student organization in the country. The Peace and Freedom Party in 1968 selected Elbridge Cleaver, a leader of the Panthers, to run for president. Fred Hampton, that 21-year-old dynamo of the Panther Party, was in Chicago organizing among Latin and white youth. We think of the Young Lords, who were a street gang, who had transformed itself to a revolutionary nationalist organization. He was organizing the Blackstone Rangers, the most notorious street gang in Chicago, as he attempted to recruit them to the Panthers. And he organized young patriots, youth, those families who had arrived from the South in the 1930s and 60s, white youth who were also being brutalized by the police in the uptown community in Chicago. The Panthers didn't fight racism with more racism. They fought racism with solidarity and a commonality among people who were being oppressed by U.S. society and their fake democracy. But big business had to answer this. The survival programs, the work against the police force and occupying army in the black community, the election of Richard Nixon, who ran on a law and order program, the Southern strategy. I'm sure you heard that during the whole election period, the Southern strategy. He sought to criminalize dissent. He called J. Edgar Hoover to his office. Why haven't we shut down the Black Panther Party? And so, when we look at the counterintelligence program, war was declared. The counterintelligence program flowed from the Palmer raids of the early 1900s that attacked socialists and anarchists as they opposed World War I. It's an offspring of the McCarthy Red Scare of the 1940s and 50s. The counterintelligence program conducted over 295 actions to destabilize black nationalist organizations. You have to remember that most of the Black Panther leadership was either in jail, on trial, or in exile. Out of that 295 actions, there were 233, 79% of COINTELPRO's military operations were targeted at the Black Panther Party. And when you think of SWAT, Special Weapons Assault Team, that will be the first time it will be created and used against the Black Panther Party. You would have the assassination of Fred Hampton as he slept in his bed while an agent provocateur and an infiltrator inside the party drugged him. Brown mails, fake letters sent to members inside the party and outside the party in order to create violence inside the organization and the wider community. Deep infiltration of every branch of the organization. Infighting among the different branches. Infighting on the central committee leadership of the organization. Debates broke out inside the organization. What is the best strategy? Should we try to continue our work on the question of urban warfare? Or should we just concentrate on the survival programs? Debate around if the Panthers are truly a vanguard party that spoke to the interests of working people in the poor, particularly in the black community. The Panthers had broad support among African Americans, opponents of Vietnam, and those international movements, the revolutionary governments, that had rested between the United States and the Stalinist Soviet Union. But what is interesting is that many of those nations that were not aligned to capitalist America or Stalinist Soviet Union wanted to make deals with the United States, like China. Nixon would arrive to China only a few weeks after Huey P. Newton made his trip in 1971-72. In Algeria, the Algerian Revolutionary Party tried to cut deals with the oil companies from the United States. Nixon would begin the process of scaling back the military draft. Nixon would also devise an elaborate scheme in many respects. With the end of Jim Crow, this allowed the black middle class that was trapped in the black community because Jim Crow did not allow them to leave, economically, politically, or socially. So Nixon said, I will engage the moderate middle class blacks with the idea of black capitalism, black entrepreneurship. Upon Huey P. Newton's release from prison, he was in prison from 1967 to about 1970. The party would go in a new direction. It would discard the question of urban warfare and look to establish more reforms, working within the system instead of trying to overthrow it. They will conduct election campaigns in 1973. Bobby Seale ran for mayor of Oakland. And Elaine Brown ran for city council. What is not known was that Huey P. Newton had a bipolar disorder that was undiagnosed. And so we see the development of a cult of personality developing. Many of the chapters were shut down. And he ordered many of the Black Panther Party members to move to Oakland, California. The working class faced the question of abject poverty, of massive austerity measures, cutbacks to vital programs. We see workers' rights being attacked, wages and health care benefits slashed. But what we have seen, we've seen the working class move to the center of the stage of events. We've seen it in Greece with 20 general strikes. In India, just this last week, a 48-hour general strike. In South Africa, we've seen the mine workers go on the offensive. Even in this country, low-wage workers and workers at Walmart are demanding unionization and better working conditions. In many respects, we're seeing working people pose the question of a socialist alternative, because they know what capitalism means. But for us here in the United States, the African Americans and people of color, we rank in every major category the lowest when it comes to jobs, when it comes to health care, when it comes to education. Our communities are occupied colonies. We must be honest with ourselves and say that. Police violence and stop and frisk is about social control. Nothing more, nothing less. And in the second term of Barack Obama, who sarcastically and opportunistically put his hands on Dr. King's Bible as he took the second oath of empire, as he dropped bombs in Yemen, killing precious babies and children. Tomorrow we face the question of automatic spending cuts that will affect working class people and the poor. And just 2 days ago, we commemorated the memory of Trayvon Martin. The Black Panther Party remains vital to study and highlight in these times of revolution and counter-revolution. As young people in African Americans, we're looking at socialism as the only alternative to the misery of class and racial, sexual and gender oppression under capitalism and white supremacy. I ask you to join us in this struggle as Socialist Alternative and the Committee for Workers International. Our struggle is about international socialism and democracy. Now, I'll leave you with the words of Fred Hampton. You dare to struggle, you dare to win. I thank you so much.